Welcome, everyone, to the NoDQ.com live recap of AEW Dynamite Blood and Guts edition for Wednesday, November 12th, 2025. Shout out to everybody watching this, whether it's live or on demand. We had not one, but two Blood and Guts matches. Plus, we had a Falls Count Anywhere match. Plus, we had a Legend segment. We'll get to that shortly. Shout out to Jeremy Dorset, who sent in a $5 super chat. No DQ zone. Noah Foster will have to eat his own words if Mercedes Moné wins the AEW Women's Championship. Jeremy says he hopes Kris Statlander has a lengthy title reign. Yes, we do have Mercedes versus Statlander at Full Gear. But first, on that road, we had the Women's Blood and Guts match. Jamie Hayter, Willow Nightingale, Harley Cameron, Toni Storm, Mina Shirakawa, and Kris Statlander versus Julia Hart, Sky Blue, Thekla, Megan Bayne, Marina Shafir, and Mercedes Moné. A 12-woman match. It was long. It was a long match. We had Willow and Sky starting the match. The heels had the advantage. Now, very early in the match, Sky Blue was bleeding. We didn't even get like 5 minutes in, and we already had blood. Then Julia was out there, so the heels had the advantage, which is usually how it goes in these War Games style matches. We had Harley in, then Thekla, then Jamie Hayter. We had Megan Bayne with Penelope Ford making a little appearance with her arm in a sling. Then Statlander was in, and each woman was bringing in different weapons, stuff we've seen in other War Games matches where the new entrant always has a weapon of choice. We had a kendo stick. We had a pull cue. We had Queen Anamata, who also got injured. She confronted Penelope Ford and got her out of the equation. Then Mercedes Moné entered, and she had all of her belts set up on a table. Now, I will give credit. I liked how Mercedes, one of her ideas for this match was to use all of her championships as weapons. She had a dozen titles, whatever it is now, and she brought a whole bunch of them in the ring for her teammates to use. I thought that was creative. I'm always a fan of when they can come up with some new ideas for these matches, and why not? She has all those titles. They might as well introduce them into the match and take advantage of that. So whoever came up with that idea, that was definitely a good one. And we had Mina Shirakawa out there. She had a barbed wire bat. And then Marina was the final entrant for the heel team. Now, there was a bed of nails. We have to have the bed of nails, of course. And she was fighting with Statlander on the outside. And she ended up kicking Statlander onto the bed of nails. And then Timeless Toni Storm was the final entrant. She had her purse. She had some pearls that she was using as a weapon. And then the match officially started. It's kind of silly to me how the match doesn't officially begin until everybody's in the ring. We went like 30 to 40 minutes here. They're just brawling, and then all of a sudden the match starts once we get everybody in the ring. We had a table set up in the ring, and Jamie Hayter powerbombed Sky Blue onto the table. It did not break, which means it will be featured on Botchamania. And then Hayter tried this flying elbow. Table still didn't break. We had another cool moment. Again, I'll give them credit. So Julia and Thekla managed to slip through those beams in the cage. And I guess the men are too big to do it. The women were able to slip through them. And I thought that was a cool little touch here, something I haven't seen before. And the cage door was opened, and we got more brawling on the outside. And then Statlander and Mercedes climbed up the cage a little bit, and Statlander gave Mercedes a Samoan drop through the table that Mercedes had brought out for her titles. And that took Mercedes out of the match. And then back in the ring, Toni and Mina Shirakawa gave Marina Shafir a DDT onto the champagne glass from a champagne bottle. And then Toni had a mirror, and she was going to use the mirror as a weapon with a hip attack, but Marina was able to counter, and Marina shoved the mirror into Toni's face, shattering glass went all over the place. And then Marina and Bayne double teamed Mina. You had Megan with the championship. She was just whipping Mina in the back with the championship, and Toni was forced to watch. And she ended up surrendering to save her friend Mina Shirakawa from further punishment. The heels picked up the win. Match was solid. I think it was mostly an average War Games match. Nothing too memorable other than what I mentioned earlier with them slipping through the beams and also Mercedes bringing in the titles. But it was your usual War Games fare. It was good, but I wouldn't call it a classic War Games or even a classic Blood and Guts match by any stretch. It was good. Did go on pretty long, but it was solid. It was entertaining. And afterwards, they did a little bit of a post-match attack because Toni tried to check in on Mina, and she paid for that. I did enjoy it. Backstage, we had a brawl where we had the Don Callis family attacking Jurassic Express in the parking lot. And the Young Bucks were in a trailer with Don Callis, and Callis said that next week they're going to send a little message to Kenny Omega. Omega will be on the show next week. They're doing a 3-hour show. I'm only recapping the Dynamite portion. I'm just going to say that right now. And this was basically just a tease for next week and a little break between the Blood and Guts match and the Adam Page match. Shout out to Dave Scheffler, who sent in a $2 super chat. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Dave says Uthman's new name for Sky Blue was Sky Red. Yes, she was definitely covered in that crimson mask, as they like to say. And I'm not shocked that we got some blood with the women. I figured somebody would bleed, and you're going to get blood in the men's match, that's for sure. You have to think that Jon Moxley was very jealous of this, but I will say, I feel like Jon Moxley has cut back on the blood after people were calling him out for bleeding on every single show. We had Hangman Adam Page, the world champion, versus Powerhouse Hobbs in a Falls Count Anywhere match. Page had his ribs taped up like he was Diamond Dallas Page in 1998. Hobbs ripped off the turnbuckle pad, and so did Page, and then Hobbs got the upper hand. He ripped off Page's bandages. He power slammed Page onto the steel steps, and then after the commercial break, he tried to put Page through the announce table, but Page ended up giving him a back body drop to the floor, and I hope Hobbs didn't hurt himself because he landed right on his ass, right on his tailbone, and I just can't imagine any safe way to take a bump like that. It just looked very painful, legitimately. They brawled into the crowd. Hobbs gave Page a spine buster through a table, but Page kicked out. So we did get a little bit of the Falls Count Anywhere. They were brawling in the ring for a while, but then they finally got into the crowd and were fighting around the arena. Then they ended up on top of a platform, and Page took a cowboy boot and he hit Hobbs with it. Hobbs fell off the platform and crashed through, I guess, a production table because there was electrical equipment and sparks were flying. And Page got down and pinned Hobbs to win the match. No shock here. I think we all knew Page was winning this. It was still pretty good. I feel bad that Hobbs is a secondary character. City by the Bay, I think Hobbs should be pushed a lot stronger than he is. AEW really needs to build towards the future. But I liked the spot. I thought that was a good finish to the match. You had the electrical sparks going off. I thought that was well done. It was a spectacle. It was a cool moment for the end of the show. Or not the end of the show, for the middle of the show, I should say. After the match, Shibata attacked Adam Page, and then Samoa Joe came in with a steel chair. He wanted the cage lowered, but thankfully for Page, Eddie Kingston and Hook made the save. And then Page challenged Joe to a steel cage match at Full Gear. And I'm just thinking, why are we having another cage match on top of Blood and Guts? There's no other stipulation match you can do besides a cage match after you just did 2 12-person or 14-person cage matches with a lot of violence. I don't know. I think I would have preferred a different stip, but whatever. I guess they got to do something to up the ante a little bit. And then we got the WWE cage matches coming up. So yeah, November is cage match month in the world of professional wrestling. Next up, we had a very lengthy filler segment between the big matches here. We had Ricky Steamboat minus Ric Flair. Now, this week's show was in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 Horsemen territory, NWA territory, the old Greensboro Coliseum. No Ric Flair, so I'm not sure what the deal was. They said that Flair and Steamboat were both going to be on the show, but it was just Steamboat, and he was starting to tell a story. And I guess in my case, I was thankful that FTR interrupted because I felt like he was going to ramble for a long time. FTR came out there and they showed a photo of FTR teaming up with Steamboat in Steamboat's retirement match. And Dax Harwood started talking trash. Stokely was getting a ton of heat. Credit to him. He was getting booed out of the building like he was Dominic Mysterio. And then Dax Harwood said that the one good piece of advice that he got from Steamboat was save your money. But unfortunately, Dax noted that Flair and Steamboat never took that advice because they had to show up there. And story's true. Dax, although Flair didn't show up, you would think Flair would show up for a nice little payday. Who knows what happened with Flair? Hopefully he's okay. Anyways, Dax called himself a bigger legend than Steamboat ever will be. And then things started to get heated. But then Steamboat said he's going to be the better man and walk away. But then as he started to leave, FTR attacked him. They were going to do the spiked pile driver. But then we had Bandito, and Brody King making the save. And Ricky Steamboat even got a few shots on Harwood before Harwood was pulled out by Stokely. So the segment, it went long. It was definitely a long segment on a show that didn't really need to be this long. But it was a little bit of a cool down segment. That's what it was supposed to be. And it was fine. It was fine for what it was. I did enjoy it. I liked that Steamboat got in a little bit of physicality. It was fun. Probably better that Ric Flair wasn't in it. I hate to say it. I mean, Flair in Greensboro would have been a nice moment, but I feel like Flair would have hogged the spotlight, and I think Ricky was a little bit better at just letting the heels do their thing. Ric Flair would have had to, be all animated and make it about himself, probably. All right, now we move on to the men's War Games match. We had 5-on-5 this time. So we had Darby Allin, Roderick Strong, Mark Briscoe, Orange Cassidy, and Kyle O'Reilly versus Jon Moxley, Claudio, Wheeler Yuta, Danny Garcia, and Pac. You had Darby and Yuta starting the match. And Darby had his skateboard, which had thumbtacks on the bottom. He busted open Yuta. So once again, blood right in the opening moments of this. And then Orange Cassidy entered the match, I should say. The baby faces had the advantage in this one, which doesn't make psychological sense, but anytime this happens, there's always some sort of an angle to give the heels the upper hand. But for the first several minutes of this match, the baby faces had the advantage, and then the heels come out to even the odds and take control. So, psychologically it's backwards, but you just go with it here. And then you had Garcia entering. Then Mark Briscoe was supposed to enter, but somebody had attacked him in the backstage area. So this was the angle to give the bad guys the upper hand, even though they didn't have the official advantage. Roderick Strong took Briscoe's place. Then Claudio was out. Then Kyle O'Reilly. Then John Moxley, who had a fork, and he was rubbing it against the back of Darby. And they used it on Kyle O'Reilly, and Kyle was just bleeding buckets, tons of blood here. They said Briscoe was probably not going to be in the match, but sure enough, after Pac entered, you had Mark Briscoe finally enter the match despite being attacked. Then we had a really stupid spot where you had Darby climbing up, and he's up like monkey bars. He's crawling across the ceiling of the cage, and he drops down onto the Death Riders, like 4 or 5 of the guys. And the problem with this is that he's doing the monkey bars. He's swinging across the ring, trying to get to the center. And the Death Riders are just standing there. They're looking up at him like a deer in the headlights. Nobody's moving out of the way. And they had plenty of time to move. And it just looks so dumb. The fact that they were just standing there basically frozen in time. So I really wasn't a big fan of that, but we had the match continuing, and then we got people brawling on the outside, and we had Mark Briscoe on top of the cage with Wheeler Yuta, and they had this rope with a hook, and Briscoe got these chairs up to the top, although it got stuck at one point when he was trying to lift up the chairs. So another moment where time stood still. Then we had Briscoe and Yuta brawling on the cage, and nobody got tossed off. The payoff of this was Briscoe gave Yuta the J Driller on the top of the cage, and then he climbed back down, and that was that. So a little bit underwhelming. I know they had to do something a little bit different, but there were 2 problems. One was the payoff wasn't really that significant. If you're not going to do the big somebody falling off the cage spot, you might as well not brawl on top of the cage. Number 1. Number 2, as Briscoe and Yuta are brawling, you can clearly see everybody on the ground just standing there. Nobody's really doing anything. And this went on for way too long. They had a commercial break, and then they came back, and Briscoe and Yuta were still brawling, and the people down below were just standing there doing nothing, basically. So, yeah, this is part of the problem with AEW's production. I think in WWE, they would be able to hide it better. Especially with like waiting for people to be, or people waiting for the catch and stuff like that. And then this moment here, I get it. The attention is supposed to be on Yuta and Briscoe, but I'm like, I can clearly see everybody down in the ring just standing there. So it kind of took me out a little bit, I have to say. Then we had more outside of the ring brawling. So, we got our cage match, but people were brawling outside of the cage. Kind of defeats the point of a cage match, You had Gabe Kidd showing up. He attacked Darby Allin with the stun gun. Then you had Pac and Darby fighting by the stage. They climbed up to the top of the entrance tunnel, and there were 2 tables set up. Gabe Kidd poured lighter fluid on the tables. He set the tables on fire. I figured we were getting fire in this match, and sure enough, once the tables were on fire, Pac press slammed Darby off the top of the tunnel, through the tables, damn near killing the guy. Darby, of course, taking the crazy bumps as he tends to do. So yeah, that was crazy. And then back in the cage, Moxley stapled Orange Cassidy's hands into his pockets, and then he choked out O'Reilly, who was covered in blood, with a chain, but Stone Cold O'Reilly refused to quit. He flipped off Moxley. Conglomeration fought back, and there were a bunch of tables in the ring, and the Death Rider members, one by one, were put through the tables, and then Kyle O'Reilly locked Jon Moxley in an ankle lock. Moxley tried to escape, but O'Reilly was able to keep the hold on, and then Moxley had no other choice but to tap out to Kyle O'Reilly, of all people, in the middle of the ring, giving the Conglomeration the win. Biggest win of Kyle O'Reilly's career, maybe. Definitely the biggest win of his career in AEW. Very interesting for Kyle O'Reilly to get the win here after a couple of years of not doing much in AEW. All of a sudden, he taps out Jon Moxley. So interesting finish here. I mean, I'm all for Jon Moxley losing and putting over somebody, but why O'Reilly of all people? Like, this would be a great opportunity to elevate a new guy. I don't know. Odd choice to go with O'Reilly, but hey, maybe this is the end of the Death Riders. Probably not. Not getting my hopes up on that one. They'll probably come back and they'll challenge the Conglomeration to another street fight, no holds barred, some kind of crazy match. And the cycle will just keep repeating itself indefinitely. But I really hope it's the end of the Death Riders, but I don't think I'm quite that lucky. But all in all, it was a good match. It had a few slow points. You know, that's the problem also with two of these matches on one show. Like, it's a bit overkill. And I have the same issue with the WWE shows. So for those of you saying, oh, well, what about the War Games matches? I'm not a fan of the two matches in one night format. I'd rather they be separate and do them when there's a good storyline reason to do it. You know, the problem with these matches, both WWE and AEW, is that they feel kind of forced. Like, hey, we got to do a War Games match, or we got to do Blood and Guts. It's that time. And then they just throw them together. But all in all, I did enjoy the show. It was entertaining. It was long, even though it was only like, 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 40 minutes, but it felt longer than that. I give it 7 out of 10. I thought it was pretty good overall. Not my favorite of the Blood and Guts matches. And I think the men's match especially didn't really have a whole lot of uniqueness to it, other than maybe Darby going off the tunnel. But it's a cage match. Why are they doing stuff on the stage? I don't know. But yeah, I did enjoy Dynamite overall. Pretty good stuff for the most part. And I did like the finish with the Hobbs and Page match. So yeah, 7 out of 10. Slight recommend. Not a strong recommend. I mean, I think there were better Blood and Guts matches. I still think the one they did in Detroit 2023 was the best one. But it was still good entertainment for 2.5 hours. All right, guys, that's all I got for AEW Dynamite. I hope you enjoyed the recap. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and spread the word about the YouTube channel. Tell a friend if you haven't already. And stay tuned to NoDQ.com for the very latest news and rumors. Fallout from Blood and Guts. We got Full Gear, which is on my birthday, by the way, so I got to stay up to 12:30 or whatever, past midnight, to recap the show. No days off, even on my birthday. So got Full Gear coming up November 22nd, although technically I'll be doing the recap on the 23rd. So there you go. All right, guys, that's it. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Say yes to NoDQ.com, and I will see you all next time.